Hello again, Gary Stearman with another Prophecy in the News Daily update. It's Friday, July 9th, and we wish you well in a world that is trying to find its footing. Again, we would like to bring up the subject which we return to fairly often, the subject of Russia. What's happening with Russia? We're interested in Russia because of Russia's prophetic position in the Bible in the last days. And I want to call your attention to a news item that I talked about not too long ago, and it has to do with the fact that the United States and Israel have troop concentrations, power concentrations in Azerbaijan, which lies on Iran's northern border. And Iran has declared a state of war on its northwestern border and is currently pouring Revolutionary Guard units with equipment into the Caspian region against what Tehran claims are U.S. and Israeli forces concentrated on army and air bases there in Azerbaijan. It's on Iran's north border, but it's on the south edge of Russia, which, believe me, is going to involve Russia in the difficulties that are building there. There's a fascinating story here from RIA Novosti, a Russian news service, about Hillary Rodham Clinton, of all people. The Muscovites, the Russians, have become very angry at our Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. And I have this news release from Wednesday, July 7th in the Novosti news service from Russia. Moscow dismissed on Wednesday the U.S. State Secretary's remarks about Georgia's occupation by Russian troops as baseless. Hillary Clinton was complaining aloud that Russian troops are still occupying Georgia in the Caspian Sea and Caucasus region. Hillary Clinton, speaking in Tbilisi on Monday on the final stage of her East European and South Caucasus tour, said the United States fully supported Georgia and flatly rejects Russian claims to have a privileged sphere of influence concerning the former Soviet republics. She said the presence of Russian troops in Georgia's breakaway regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia was in the breach of the ceasefire that ended the 5-day Russian-Georgian war in August of 2008. So Hillary is taking a big swaggering steps over there in the Caucasus region and telling the Russians to back off. Why do you suppose Hillary Clinton would be doing this at this particular time? Well, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we are moving troops into the Caucasus region in Azerbaijan. We have, in other words, a military buildup in the Caucasus region. And the Russians say, quote, the use of the term occupation by State Secretary Hillary Clinton in this context has absolutely no basis. Now, that was the Russian Foreign Ministry that made that statement. In other words, we don't have any troops in the region, in spite of the fact that Hillary Clinton, our Secretary of State, says, yes, you do have troops in the region. We've got some swaggering going on, some political positioning, I think, prior to what must certainly be a coming war in the Middle East directed against Iran and the nuclear weapons there. Interestingly, this side note from Bill Gertz, correspondent, Washington correspondent, speaking about Russian bombers. Remember, we used to hear about the old Russian Bear bombers that would be swooping across the U.S. and Canadian territory in the north and having to be chased off by U.S. fighter planes. Guess what? It's still going on. Russia is continuing to fly strategic nuclear bombers near U.S. and Canadian airspace because the Russian military is seeking to maintain, quote, the illusion of power, said the commander of the U.S. Northern Command. That's NORAD. Admiral James Winfield Jr., who took over NORAD, said that the Russian strategic invasion forces began stepping up training flights of nuclear-capable Tu-95 Bear bombers near or through U.S. and Canadian airspace. When I see nuclear-capable Russian bombers flying through NORAD territory, and I see our Secretary of State speaking in Georgia, about Soviet troops buildups in the Caucasus, I see a tightening up of the tensions between the United States and Russia. Again, just prior to what must certainly be a coming war against Iran. And I think Russia is trying to exert some force here. Admiral Winfield, who heads NORAD, said jet interceptors are not ordered to intercept all the Russian bomber flights. And this is a quote from him: "If we intercept every single flight that comes in our direction, then we're really just feeding into their propaganda," he said. "So we intercept them when we feel like we ought to, and we have various criteria that we use for that, including just rehearsing our own skills." In other words, our ability to intercept those bombers. I find all this very fascinating. Again, if you're a Russia watcher, you will note a very slight daily, weekly increase in Russian maneuvers, troop placements, bomber flights, etc. We are seeing a military buildup on several levels. And that military buildup will culminate in Russia's invasion of Israel, in which Gog says in Ezekiel 38:11, "Thou shalt say," this is speaking of Gog's own words, "I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, having neither bars nor gates, to take a spoil, to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited." And you know, when you look at the prophecy of Ezekiel 38, it looks like today's Israel. It doesn't look like the Israel of the 19th century. It doesn't look like the Israel of the early 20th century. It looks like the Israel of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and up to the present date. The land of unwalled villages, a beautiful place, fertile farmland, free enterprise, a thriving, burgeoning tourist destination. Israel is a wonderful place, just as depicted, by the way, in Ezekiel 38, which has led many biblical expositors to think that that attack must take place in the context of pretty much the present day as we now view it in Israel, in the Middle East. Well, that's a little look at what's going on right now around the world. Our Secretary of State Hillary Clinton warning the Russians back, saying, keep your troops north of the Caucasus. Meantime, in Azerbaijan, we have troops along with apparently some Israeli forces, and the Russians are up to their usual tricks, little gunboat diplomacy, some Russian bombers flying into U.S. and Canadian airspace. I think it's fair to say that tensions are increasing, and as we continue to watch from a prophetically based perspective, this is what we're seeing. And we shall watch, of course, and our Lord asked us to be watchful, particularly as we see those closing days approaching, which we believe we do. Gary Stearman with another Prophecy in the News Daily Update, wishing you a great day in the Lord, and reminding you to keep looking up.